Hello and welcome to our fourth panel in Open Edition, Prints as a Portfolio, exploring prints as an asset class. I'm really excited about this panel. This is a conversation that I have a lot in the background with people within the industry. And what's exciting about it is it's a theme that divides the marketplace and creates a lot of argument and debate around whether or not we really should be classing art, and particularly prints in this context, as assets, as financial assets. What's great about today is that that conversation is with three people who can really validate the perspectives of the industry on this topic. Simon Chadwick, a partner at Mishcon Private Client Department, who deals specifically with art and cultural property law. So brilliantly crucial legal information for once in this conversation, because quite often we have it without that. And also Anna Orta, who is a collectibles manager and art manager for Timeless Investments, which is a company that fractionalizes art as well as watches and wine and other collectible assets. So very much looking at the investment market. And the company is actually financially regulated, which I think is a key thing that we'll be talking about today. And our very own Jasper Tordorf, who is our Banksy and modern British specialist, whose unique perspective is really around the fact that he talks constantly all day, every day to our collectors who have different, they collect for investment reasons, they collect for passion reasons, but really ultimately within those markets, there are works that are moving quite substantially in value. So it's great because we've got those perspectives all around the table, but we will be throwing in the devil's advocate every now and again in order to check us and make sure that we understand why this divides opinion and where a more traditional art market sits, within this context. Guys, thank you so much for joining us all today. Really great to have you here. We could talk about art as an asset, and if we agree with that, we don't agree with that, how that comes into the marketplace. For a very long time. We're going to focus on prints today. I think I want to make one thing, I think, really clear when we start talking about how new this art market is. It wasn't that long ago, people forget that the art market used to be the art world. In the 60s, we talk about very much the birth of the art market coming about. We talk about that, record-breaking sale when the Valacquez sold for over 1 million in 1970. Fast forward to 50 years, and Beeple's NFT is selling for $69 million. So we're not talking about a very short period of time, and the prints market particularly has had a huge focus of an asset perspective. So I'm going to dive straight in and ask Jasper, can you define why the prints market is a very special part of this conversation when we talk about art as an asset class?
Yeah, no, of course. And it's really important. I think one of the main drivers is to define prints and multiples. I think the sort of examples that you used there were sort of original works. And I think what makes the prints and multiples market so interesting is the fact that it's a comp space market. It's impressions of works that are in editions of multiple pieces that are being traded worldwide, globally, through sort of auction houses, galleries and dealers. And I think that's what makes it quite exciting, particularly when you're looking at it as maybe an asset to diversify a existing portfolio, just because you can go back and you can say, right, what is the trading history of this print, this impression? Let's assume all the conditions are the same, and you can track it. And that's not something you can do. To use that example of that original that you mentioned at the start, Charlotte, these are pictures that would sell maybe once in a lifetime. And so determining the value of that is really difficult. Whereas with impressions and prints, you can see, there's one that sold recently in LA or in London. And I think that's where you can make a really informed decision about buying a print, is because you can see what it's done, what somebody's publicly paid for something. And so that can give any sort of investor, not to use that word, or art collector or passion investor, huge amounts of confidence in making a decision about a print by the very nature of what a print is.
And I suppose we have to just add context to that. We're talking about the secondary market of prints and multiples, right? So we're talking about, because otherwise we could say the same. The traditional marketplace, has a lot of things because they want to support the private, the primary market, and which is absolutely something we should be doing. But today's discussion from an investment focus is on that secondary market because of those comps assets and that data. Anna, can you tell us a little bit more? Timeless chooses to, you might want to tell us a little bit about what Timeless does, chooses to fractionalize art as well as other assets, but chooses prints quite specifically to do this. Why is it that they use prints?
Yeah, that's correct. So maybe just as a context, so Timeless is a platform, as you said, for fractional ownership in very many different collectible categories. So it's not just art, but it's also cars, watches, wine, sneaker. There's a lot. And the reason why for art in particular, our team is focusing primarily on prints is what Jasper just mentioned on there, because there are many data points, that we can use to sort of look at the historical performance of a work or an individual print or a series overall, and really give our users that do not come from a traditional market space, traditional art space, or they're not seasoned collectors. They really value getting as much information, objective information, as they can, and I think prints have the possibility, because you have so many data points, within the history of 10 years, 20 years, where you can make informed decisions. And at the same time, it's also, the market itself is a lot more liquid in a sense. So you have a lot more, for us, obviously, it's not just about bringing an artwork to the platform and then having users buy fractions, but we obviously want to also sell it at one point where investors can get a return. And I think prints in that sense offer a bigger market with more liquidity than having, individual pieces, which are quite limited to like a singular collector or something.
I think, we're talking about historical data points. We're talking about the ability to be able to track an asset in the way that you would another luxury asset. Now, this is something that has been slightly exploited, in my opinion, to some degree, by a new breed of gallery that has sort of grown over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. And I think, we see an awful lot of data that shows not just the print market, but the entire art market alongside the S&P 500. I think we might even have an image of something similar to what is spoken about a lot in this marketplace. And my problem with a lot of these things, and I think there's a couple of other ones, is that we're really looking at the entire market, aren't we? This is used hugely to talk about art as an asset class. Look, it's outperformed this. Everything else is dipping. Go and buy art. These for me are problematic. Are they problematic for you guys? How do you see that in relation to what you're talking about when you're talking about prints or sneakers and the market that is a little bit more niche to those particular areas where you have comp assets?
Shall I go, or yeah? So I think, what you're saying is definitely right. I think, unfortunately, a lot of, these places that you've mentioned are making it quite easy for themselves by just throwing in these big numbers and sort of claiming this is applicable to everything. And I think what every, individual needs to be aware of and be very critical when they see that kind of data. So I think, it depends how much you want to get into it. In the messaging that, art as an investment class can be profitable and over the long term has had great performances is obviously not wrong, it's right. But to really make informed decisions also, as in our case, where you can invest into individual assets, you need to be a lot more detailed with the data that you look at. So you look at the individual artists market, you look at the series, how it has developed in that particular work itself. So I think, for everyone who's sort of delving into the area of art investment, you need to be very critical and be aware of these sometimes just big numbers that are not necessarily reflective of everything.
Big numbers that are very good for marketing. Simon, where's the legal line on this? Because my experience is is actually just having that difference of opinion with perhaps more traditional models that go, if a client walks into a gallery and starts talking to me about the investment potential of an artwork, I'm not going to entertain that. That's not what we're here to talk about, which, you know, I think is difficult when you're talking about something of that value. So where is the line in terms of people giving what seems like almost financial advice to me?
I think so that there's kind of a variety of different things here that are going into play. So you obviously have the newspapers are awash with stories of artworks selling for ridiculous sums of money, and you have a lot of galleries that talk about and advertise themselves on the basis of the returns that have been made. That's not just in respect of, you know, the art market as a whole and using kind of various different metrics to show that, but also you have galleries who are saying, you know, it's plastered across their social media feeds that they made 600% return for their clients over the years or over a year period. When you delve down into that, though, it's not always the case. You've had a number of cases that have come to the courts recently where, for example, the galleries have actually been buying their own artworks. So they will basically buy it off their own wholesaler. They will then sell it to the client with a markup, and then they will buy it back themselves through another entity. And so they're able to show that within the space of kind of 6 months, this investor's supposedly, well, they have made the money, but it entices other people to come into the market or entices that investor to come back. There is a very fine line between giving financial advice or investment advice when advising a client to buy an artwork, or giving them examples of where it could be potentially a good investment. And I think you need to be as open as possible with the client. You need to first of all say, you know, this is the view of the market. I can give you these comparables and show you kind of, you know, this print edition 1 of 50 sold X on Y date, and then, you know, this one 3 of 50 sold later down the you know, with this. So it's what you have to back it up, and it is for them to make the choice. But it's also important, kind of, it should not be part of a hard sell. That there is also an element that the client themselves it should be made clear to them that it's their responsibility also to kind of check the figures themselves. They need to be doing the due diligence into the piece, not just relying on something that you have. And there are, you know, MyArtBroker, you're able to check through that. There's ArtNet, there's other databases and things where people can check the prices before to ensure that they agree that it is the type of investment that is for them.
It is such a fine line, and I think as it's becoming a much more, as you say, like it's in every newspaper, and it's becoming a question that's kind of, you know, how often is it asked, Jasper? How often are you asked by clients, not just, you know, what did it sell for? How often do you actually get asked, will this go up in value? I mean, you know, you're sitting there and so much of it is to do with supply and demand, and you know the demand, right? So you know very quickly how liquid something will be.
It's a question I get asked quite often with clients. It's like being an expensive restaurant and ordering sort of right to left on a wine list. A lot of clients really want value, and they want to make sure that they're buying at the right price. Now, I can't predict what any market's going to do in the future, but what we can do and what we try to do as a company is give all of the data to make the client make an informed decision about what the market might do. There's so many different things that can affect markets in terms of value, but as a broker as well, being sort of at the front line of sort of sales and where bits are moving, I can add expertise in terms of what's hot in the market, where's demand, which can inform whether works are a good value or not. But and I think Simon touched on it really well. It's such a fine line that you have to tread, because there's financial risk associated with sort of any art acquisition. It sort of lends quite nicely to discussing exit strategies with clients down the line. I think that's often overlooked, particularly with new clients coming into the market. You want to have conversations which are, what does the market look like? What does the value of the piece look like 5 years down the line? What is my exit strategy? And that's something that I think is missing in the market and is so important.
Why do you think it has been missing, and why do you think there is still why do you think the word investment and art as an asset is still such a dirty word to so many players? I mean, Anna, you first of all, you're financially regulated as a business, so I assume therefore you have very strict guidelines about what you can say and what you can do, but ultimately they're not taking the artwork home with them or the sneakers home with them. So their primary objective, other than the joy of being part of a collecting club, and I'd love to hear a bit more about that because it's really interesting in terms of bringing new people into this market. But what is the sell to somebody looking to buy a fraction of an artwork, and how do you discuss the concept of art as an asset to a newcomer into your area?
So I think maybe adding on to what was said before, just to be clear as well, in that sense, like us as a platform as well, don't give investment advice, as Simon said and Jasper said as well. All we do is provide the information to the best of our knowledge, both in terms of the financial rationales, but also the emotional rationales, so the story behind the artwork, so that everyone who comes to our platform can basically decide for themselves whether they want to buy a fraction of a piece of art or not. And as to your question, so I mean, the users that we get, obviously, I would say, come to our platform with already, the idea of art as an investment, or the potential at least of art as an investment in mind. They are typically quite young collectors. They come from the fintech or finance world, maybe even, had some touch points with crypto. So in general, I think their profile is quite different than to, the classic collector that we have in the art market, or even other, traditional players within the art market that don't like to use investment in combination with art. So I think the sort of motivation behind looking at art is already quite different. And then, as you said, I mean, obviously we try to give, data, investment data, but at the same time, every asset, when you go in the profile, has really extensive information on the emotional value behind it. So the artist, the market, the piece itself. So I think it's maybe the first impulse is the investment impulse, but we actually have people bored by art, as a passion investment as well. And we've had cases where actually an investor, who's buying fractions, has actually purchased now a whole work from us. So it's nice to see that they come in with the one intention, and then it develops into something else, and they really become passionate about art on many different levels. Yeah.
Mm. I want to move on to, we've talked about the context of it within the art market. I'd like to move on to why art. But before I do, I would like to mention there's a little, but for those watching, which I should have mentioned before, but now we've got into it, probably lots of questions have popped into your mind. You can ask questions below and they will appear in the chat for our production team and be fed through to the panelists. So please do, as we talk, pop your questions in there, and I will make sure that there's time towards the end of the session to answer them. One of the questions that I have a lot with people outside of the art market, okay, so we talked about the conversations we will have within it, is why would I invest in art? I've got, yes, even if I had 10% of my portfolio to invest in something fun, there's a lot more to invest in that is potentially going to yield me more. There are things that are, a better deal from a kind of capital gains tax perspective. There are things that I'm passionate about, and art is one of those things. But why art? Why do you think that prints in particular, perhaps, appeal to what we're definitely seeing in our business? And Anna, you've talked about this just now, a slightly newer, potentially younger, I want to say breed of collector. It sounds very derogatory. But why do you think, what is the interest? Where are the new collectors coming from that are seeing this as an asset that they'd like to explore? Jasper, perhaps you.
I'd say there's been a huge increase in awareness. I think a lot of people hear the term art and investment and think you must have hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds disposable to sort of play around with. And I think there's an awful lot more education that needs to be done to show clients that actually you can be a Banksy buyer with a budget of £15,000, or you can pick up a beautiful etching by Hockney for sub £10,000. And why art as well is sort of, you enter into like a community of people that own these pieces. You get to see these pieces. You're buying like bits of culture that you can have on your wall and that you can own, and you can sort of show proudly in your house and talk to your friends about. So clients go on a journey, and I get this an awful lot with new clients that I've taken on. They go on a journey and they become, I think the education is so interesting. We're selling artists that have had a huge impact on like a cultural importance in whichever part of the world that the client's from. And I think learning about that artist, you sort of immerse yourself into, okay, how the whole market works, and you want to sort of learn more about what the other artists have done and sort of why did they do that and not this. And so I think it's more than just owning a picture. It's sort of taking you into a whole new world where you can, educate yourself about all different things that you never would have known about. And you enter a community, and you just don't really want to stop. There's so much scope in the print market, depending on which artist you're buying. And I think it's not just something that could potentially go up in value or decrease in value. There's so much more to it. And I think owning something physical, you might disagree, Anna, but owning something physical is a really nice thing. You can't do that with a stocks and shares account. And that's a special thing.
Yeah.
Anna wants to come back on that.
I can add on to that. I think it's exactly what Jasper said. I mean, on the one hand, it's really nice to see that these barriers, or I feel like, artists for quite a long time always been such a secluded sort of world where people thought they don't have a place in, or, they don't have access to. And I think like slowly through platforms, MyArtBroker and other ones, it's being broken down, this barrier a little bit, with the information that is being shared. And as Jasper said as well, what you said, like, I think if you invest in art, whether it's the whole piece or just a fraction, you're really buying into this community, into this ecosystem. And I think for a lot of also young collectors, it's a lot more interesting to talk about how they hold a fraction of an amazing drawing by Picasso or a Campbell soup, like a soup can by Warhol, rather than talking about, okay, I have stock in Tesla. So it's a bit more interesting in terms of dinner conversations, or in general being part of that community. Maybe adding one thing in terms of fractional ownership, I think as well, what's interesting is that I feel that especially younger generations are completely are rethinking this concept of ownership overall. So I feel that for them it's not necessarily so important all the time to have the whole piece and have it physically in their house or as a car in the garage, that they can show off. But it's really more about being part of the community, to having that experience, and in that sense have a lot more options and a lot more diversity of the ecosystems that you can be part in, rather than putting everything in one basket, and buying things as a whole. So that's
I mean, Simon, in terms of cultural property, and you see an awful lot of things come through, and you must have seen a change in the trend of the sorts of cases you're dealing with over the last sort of 5-10 years, especially under this concept of art being traded like an asset. What trends have you seen in terms of this being a changing marketplace and young?
I think Anna mentioned it quite nicely there, where she was saying kind of it was a closed community, the art world. I mean, there was an element where all of those who are not in it are looking in and seeing kind of the glamour, but they're not invited to that party. I think the really interesting thing that the print market has done is it's opened that up, and it is looking at it in different ways, with whether it's fractionalization, whether it's having kind of being open about what the price is, what the values are, as a first port of call on the website, on whatever, it's a lot more accessible. It's a lot more understandable for people who are wanting who have been kind of outside of this world and are now wanting to get in, that they can understand more what's happening and what's available and why it's available, and in what manner it's available, whether it's a fraction or whether it's a full piece, or how it works. With regards to cases, I mean, that there is a lot more it's interesting, kind of, there is a lot more scams that we see going around. I hate to go from saying it's a great thing to be into, but to then terrifying everyone. All I'm saying that for is just to be careful and to watch out. Over the period of COVID, for example, a lot of artists took to selling through Instagram or through direct sources, and that led to what we saw as a lot of issues arising, where people were contacted out of the blue by people offering artworks. They assumed from the conversations they were having on there, or they were having video calls with them, that sort of thing, that everything is kosher. And then, they pay money without actually having seen the artwork in the first place. And we're talking we had one client who paid over, I think, 350 grand in relation to a single print, and then in the post received 2 postcards. And this is transacting between the UK and the US. So and you get to the point where the costs involved in potentially pursuing that person might well outweigh the actual value of the piece. What do you do? Do you even have the money to be able to pursue it when you paid that 350,000? So it's really, the print market and the art market itself has come up with these incredible new ways of bringing new interested people into the market. And it's just a question, I think, of making sure that when people are actually entering the market, they don't go in naively. They look around, they kind of keep an eye on is the person who I'm talking to reputable? Is the gallery that I'm dealing with, have they just been set up last week and have been claiming these incredible returns? It's in the same way as you would as you're doing something in person. You're wanting to get the measure of someone. You're wanting to talk with someone. You're wanting to kind of look into them and understand are they in this for real, or is it something that they are basically conducting a scam?
Yeah, I mean, risk mitigation, we've moved into, so let's talk about that, because and it's more devastating than ever. You're investing, I think this particularly, things happen in both sides of the market, but in the primary market you're often supporting a young artist. In those cases of the Instagram during COVID, there's a lot of people supporting young artists. There was amazing COVID art campaigns going on with big artists offering smaller artworks for supporting artists. But let's talk about, it's interesting how you've all discussed prints in one way or another as a sort of access point to the market, particularly for younger collectors. A lot of people talk about prints as like a good access starting point. I actually think that whilst that is true, they have sort of outgrown that label within this asset context. And I wonder what you think about that, because and we'll move on to, which is why it's become very, very difficult, because it's sort of a market that's thought of as a secondary part to the original market, whereas in many cases, great printmakers are primarily printmakers. And certainly from a value perspective, we're now talking about works that sell for, regularly over £100,000 and up to £500,000. Jasper, can you talk a little bit about that and help people understand? And this probably will go back to minimizing risk and what to look for in the print market. But I think it's actually one of the things that people fall foul to, because they don't understand what a print is. Very difficult without that education.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when I speak with people, friends of mine outside of the market, I think it's sometimes frustrating and it's difficult to explain. But prints for a lot of these artists, it's not an afterthought. David Hockney, for example, really like key artists. The original sell for well over into the millions and housed by most sort of major gallery in the world. But the prints were produced early 70s, and they funded his trip to America, and they were made by him in a studio and signed and handled by him. And there's something really special about that. The amount of work that goes into a screen print or to an etching or to lithograph, it's incredible. And I think in order to make a market, you need repeat sales, you need multiple sales, and that just wouldn't really exist with the limited amount of originals that artist has created. we're seeing it more often than not with new artists, primary artists coming from major galleries, producing prints. You can buy so many prints. The value of the prints now are becoming the value of some of the original works, and you can see that. You can track that data from 10, 20 years ago, depending on the sort of career of the artist. So I think that's really, and that just comes down to educating people about what a print is, and sort of spreading that word on that particular subject. And also, just to add, artists, particularly the blue chip artists, it's become so expensive to buy originals by these artists, and naturally that's impacted and increased the value of the prints that they've produced.
But it does make it a little bit harder to get into, because there's a lot of forgeries in this market, because they're ultimately they are easier to forge. It's actually very, very difficult to forge an original unique on canvas, show it to a specialist, and to get away with it. It is like, because it's different within the print market, and particularly certain print markets. So let's move fully into this area. If I'm a young, I don't have to be young, perhaps I'm a new collector, and I'm doing my homework, and we can deal with this from a fractional perspective and separately to buying one particular artwork. But let's start with buying this one particular artwork. I've got my eye on if I give you a Banksy, it'll be a different story, Jasper, from a Hockney iPad drawing. Let's start with a Banksy. I want to buy a Banksy, Jasper. How do I mitigate risk? And then we'll throw the Hockney one to Simon. I want to buy a Banksy. How do I mitigate risk? I want it to hold its value. What should I know? What are the red flags?
To go back to Simon's point, I think, and it's so crucial, your motivations have to align with the person that you're buying from. You need to do your due diligence and understand, is this person reputable? That's the first thing to do. I also think the second thing is look at some data points. Historically, when you used to go to sort of Duke Street and go to the galleries in London, you wouldn't be able to have that data. And so the dealer or gallerist would have a sort of upper hand on you. That data is accessible. So do some digging into the market. Banksy's relatively easily, because there's pest control, which is a great thing that Banksy set up to authenticate his own works. And looking at sort of past sales demands, which you can get from our site and see by speaking to a specialist like myself, and just making sure, finally, the conditions as expected. Far too often I see clients buying works framed, and at this price point, or any price point really, you want to know what the back of the print looks like. Conditions are a massive driver, and we haven't mentioned it yet. So you want to see all aspects, all angles of the print before making a purchase. Just making sure you're buying at the right price, whether that involves doing some research on how the market works, how to understand auction data. Those are all crucial things to go into. And I can't forget, I know we're talking about investment and passion assets, but make sure you like the thing. It's difficult to predict what a market might do. And so it's important that if it's hanging in your hallway, that every day when you walk past it, that it's an image that resonates with you and that you like. So the golden rule would always be sort of buying what you like. It's it's a passion investment at the end of the day.
And then you don't mind so much when it goes down in value.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a caveat.
Simon, what can I do to minimize my risk on buying a Hockney print? I've been doing some research. I'm doing some homework. What things can I do? And I'd love to talk a little bit about something we've spoken about before in terms of buying at auction, and does that guarantee me authenticity for life? And where should I start?
So, I mean, I think Jasper kind of hits the nail on the head with it. There's the research, but ask questions. Ask questions of the person you're buying it off. Where have they got it from? How have they got it? Who's where's it passed through is what you're wanting to see. In essence, the provenance. Hockney's actually quite a good one because of the fact that there are catalogue raisonnés of his prints. So potentially it might well be in the catalogue raisonné. So you're looking there at hopefully checking that the edition is edition numbers correct, that it's an authorized edition. So, what is the number of, for example, artist proofs, printers proofs? What's the actual numbered edition? Have a look into. We've mentioned about the person who's selling it to you. Speak to people about it. I honestly, one of the things that I think is so wonderful about the art world is that people are just willing to talk. People who aren't even connected necessarily into the sale, people they want to share their passion and their knowledge in respect of an artist's artworks, etc., with other people. Definitely looking at the back, I completely agree with the private sale versus the auction kind of purchase is obviously slightly different. In auctions, the terms and conditions will generally provide in there that there is an authenticity guarantee. However, there are ways around that, and scholarly opinion can change. So the authenticity guarantee will only be viable if it's not a case of one scholar at one point said this print was by Hockney and then suddenly the point of view's changed. And also there are other caveats that the auction houses sometimes helpfully put in there. From the private sale perspective, there will be terms, representations and warranties that will be in there that generally will say this is an artwork by so and so. It's I represent and warrant that it is authentic. I represent and warrant that there are no third-party claims, so no other people who might suddenly come out of the woodwork. And I represent and warrant that I am the owner. So that there are ups and downs to either side, but then still the problem arises that if you have been caught out, you're still then going to potentially have to pursue it. And generally, people won't just turn around and say, okay, here you go, there's your money, I'll take the artwork back. So it is a question of just making sure that you do your research, ask questions as much as possible, educate yourself, as Jasper has said. It's one of the most incredible things about the art world is the fact that you have this incredible, particularly now that everything's, I sound like an old man here now that everything's online, but you have these incredible resources that you can look, you can understand the whole print process, going from the artist there with the master printer producing the bonnetire, the first kind of proof that then moves on to artist proofs, printers proofs, through to the actual editions and then onto the market. It's a fascinating market to be involved in, and buying, even if you're just buying to check that you're not making a mistake when doing it, you will find it so rewarding to have done that research beforehand, and to learn more when you actually go ahead and make that purchase.
That's such good advice. And funnily enough, the questions that are coming through, which I will get to, are just perfect examples of that. People asking questions about how things work and not understanding how things work, whether, as you said, Simon, the PP-AP thing throws people off. We have questions about whether or not an AP should really be more valuable than a regular edition. Well, is that the market translating that? Are they actually any different? Commission rates, questions, and a lot of people, I think, are quite intimidated to ask these questions. It's something that we spend a lot of time trying to explain not to be at MyArtBroker. These are big institutions, some of these places where it feels quite awkward to ask the stupid question. Jasper, we were just talking about that the other day. It might be a bit of a stupid question, and 99% of the time it's not a stupid question. 99% of the time.
Yeah, it's a risk.
So possibly our biggest advice is ask as many questions as possible, really understand what you're getting into. Potentially, if it's a large amount of money, make sure that contract's been read by a lawyer, and just take your time making that decision for the first time. Anna, tell us about the fractional world in the same regard. What if I want to invest? I believe that I can invest as little as €50 in an asset through timeless investments. So let's say I'm not using timeless investments and I know everything is done beautifully. What should I worry about, and what have you seen there being some issues with in the past in fractional businesses?
I think, it goes a bit in the direction of risk management in that sense. So I think, collectibles or art, there is obviously a certain risk involved with it, both in terms of the investment potential, which I think we've talked about a lot, but also, as we now just outlined, in terms of the authenticity. Is it really real? How's the condition? And I think, for us, we obviously have a lot of internal steps and criteria that need to be ticked off before we actually purchase the work ourselves. And we only work with really verified partners. They will run through KYC checks. We have contracts for every asset that we purchase. We have annual audits by third independent parties. So really, making sure that our users can trust us and, can really be sure that sort of the assets or the artworks that we have on our platform are sort of are legit and are authentic to the industry standards, basically. And I think, I don't know, but I think sometimes, if these criteria are not being taken seriously and, it's just not following through on this trust and verification, that's when it starts to become a problem. And unfortunately, when these cases appear as well and then are talked about in the press and everywhere, it sheds a bad light on the industry as itself, or as the fractional ownership as itself, when really I think a lot of players are really trying their best to mitigate these risks and be as correct and basically and truthful as they can. And it's also in terms of fractional ownership, maybe I can add to this. So as you said, you can buy shares from our platform starting at 50 euros, and then afterwards, when basically once you have these shares and the asset is financed, you can trade them with other users on the platform, or basically wait until us as a company exit it. And for the trading and actually the payout of shares, all of our users have to provide KYC documents as well. So we're really making sure, not only in the purchasing process, but also by the payout, so money, that these people are compliant to KYC standards.
This is such good advice. Funnily enough, as we've said, ask all the questions. It seems to have given everybody a sense that they must ask all the questions, and it's been a classic example of it. So I must leave time to get through some of these. I just wanted to say one more thing that I think is relevant to that conversation, which is around condition issues and works being sold, particularly prints in frames on gallery walls, where you don't know what the condition is. And then there's a bit of education around that in terms of, a Warhol print that was produced and given out at a factory party and thrown in the back of a car. And these things are meant to have condition issues, aren't they? They're meant to have, and there are things we can do that. Hopefully everybody watched our earlier panel on conservation and restoration. But again, it's, things like that. People go, I only want it in immaculate condition because I know that I must have it in immaculate condition, otherwise it won't hold its value. And whilst Jasper has spoken about the condition being a factor in value and holding its value and being able to easily offer it back to the market, so much of this is about education, about what you're buying. And the great thing about prints, and I kind of wanted to go a bit further into this. If we have time, we might get there. Is you're essentially, I love this analogy, is when you buy a print from a series, you're buying almost into the series as its asset. So it's almost like one print from a series of 200 is a fraction of that series. So there is that sense of community, and then the little differences in value based on everything from condition to its provenance. Again, provenance can have a huge impact on, if it came out of Elton John's collection, it's going to hold more value than if it came from somewhere less notable. Right, I must get into these questions. They're quite very, very good ones. So there's been a growing trend of prints being marketed like luxury goods rather than artworks. What with the timed releases, thinking about Hearst primary market in particular, are collectors being sold art, or are they being sold a carefully controlled market?
That's a great question. It's been really topical, particularly with what Henny, so that's one of the prime major publishers of Damien Hirst's work. And essentially, I kind of agree with the question. I think that they're being sold as sort of brand. Artists have become such celebrities. If you look at Warhol back then, he was a celebrity, and factory editions might be similar to what Damien Hirst is doing with Henny. However, that's far stretched. I don't agree with that statement. I think it's becoming quite easy for artists as famous as Damien Hirst to do these time releases, and they raise a huge amounts of money for people like Henny, the publishers, and also himself as an artist. It can have negative impacts on an artist market. Essentially what it does is, with the timed editions, what anyone can do is buy works relatively cheaply directly from the publishers within a certain allocation of time. Ultimately, what happens is these editions become very, very large. They're marketed far and wide on social media, and they're relatively inexpensive. Essentially, what this does is eventually these works end up on the secondary market. Now, there's a slight chance that these might be more valuable, but as more get produced, the market becomes much more saturated. And that's definitely what we're seeing with the Damien Hirst market. So it can have major benefits to him as an artist, more people owning his work, but in the long run, it certainly has decreased the value of other works that previously traded at much higher pricings. But I agree with the statement that they're not necessarily being sold on artwork, but they're being sold on, it's signed by Damien Hirst, which is the sort of attraction to most people.
I mean, is there an element therefore, Jasper, that a better bet is an artist that is no longer producing?
Definitely. It's a difficult one. With an edition, a printed, let's say the Weather series by David Hockney from 1970, there's not going to be any more of those. And so therefore, if we dull it down to sort of supply and demand, then yes, there's if somebody wants one and there's only two in the market, that you're going to be in a much stronger position as opposed to owning a Virtues that's from an edition of 1,000. So definitely that is the case, and we have actually seen that trend happening with the Damien Hirst market.
And I've got there's a stinger one here. Would you like it? Are you feeling ready for it? How do you counter the argument that fractional art investing is just another form of securitization, turning art into a financial product that benefits platforms more than investors?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy one. Where do I start? I mean, look, I think, fractional ownership is not for everyone. And I think people, that explore that route need to understand sort of what it means, that, it's completely different than buying an artwork as a whole, and for all the reasons that Jasper has explained. So, I think this is like just sort of in the expectations that you go in, and with the mindset that you go in when exploring fractional ownership. In terms of sort of whether there's value, I mean, I think, the exits that Timeless has created already, and the revenues that we have generated for our users, and you can also take competitors where the same examples are existing, do show that there is, potential, and that, art as an asset class has legitimacy. It probably has a much longer time frame than, when you compare to other investment products. But I think, if you're aware of that, if you're aware that this is a long-term investment route that you're taking, which can allow you to diversify your portfolio also with as many fractions as you want. You don't need to obviously invest loads of money in it, but you can also start small. I think there are a lot of examples that have shown that this concept is working, and that there can be returns achieved with art. So in that sense, I don't think it's just platforms benefiting.
I think that was expertly answered, and I will answer also. I will add to that actually and I don't have stats on this, but I know that certainly the trend that we've seen is that, and it's an interesting one that's come about sort of, I would say, since COVID, is a new I'm going to use it again, a new breed of collector entering the market from either a crypto or a fractionalization or NFT spin, which is not, a very unusual way to enter the traditional art market and start buying prints. And so as much as, we were arguing earlier about whether or not prints are an access to the art market, I think fractionalization very much is. I know multiple people that would like to buy an artwork, but they're not financially ready to do so. So this is how they enter it. So, and I would say that is a strong growing trend that is showing how fractionalization is allowing people to get some of that education that we were talking about. You know, like if you can spend 50 euros and watch a market and learn about a market, that's a really good way of mitigating risk when you suddenly have the financial wealth to be able to invest in a Hockney print in 10 years time. Would Jasper, you're nodding, you see a few of those collectors who have taken that journey into the print market, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a sort of a weird connection between the sort of the pump of the crypto markets and also certain buyers, particularly in the urban art space. I mean, more importantly with sort of Banksy. It's a similar sort of risk appetite, similar sort of profile of buyers. And yeah, it's interesting. I think also just to sort of say things about, you know, fractionalization, we talk an awful lot about liquidity in the print market. Buying a £100,000 original, it sounds like a lovely thing, but in terms of when you come to sell that, there's a much smaller market of people that might want to buy that. Prints sort of give you the opportunity to buy and sell much faster, usually at sort of lower price points. And I think also that's sort of what Timeless and that platform allows is you can, given that sort of €50 sort of the entry price, you can do that. You can sort of de-risk and diversify your portfolio by having loads of different artists, because the markets, if you look at different artists, all perform at different levels. And so it's a really clever idea to be sort of exposed and sort of minimize risk by having different artists and different works, which, yeah, prints allow you to do, and so does sort of fractional ownership.
Yeah, you're not putting all your eggs in the same basket, to coin a much worse way of putting that. And here's one about the Banksy market. Jasper, you spoke earlier about Banksy investment, but the prices can, of course, fluctuate. So buying something you're passionate about, with his editions now trading to 5-6 figures and his original significantly more, would you say his position is secured in the market, or is it still to be proven? Perfect one for you, Jasper. Perfect.
It's a great question, and it's one that we've discussed internally as well. I personally think, it's going to be biased, but Banksy's the king of blue chip. One recent example that can back that fact up is when Banksy did his London Zoo works, the whole world was interested. Every single journalist wanted to sort of know what was going on and get a sort of insider's view. And that's a market that you can be involved in. I don't think Banksy's going anywhere. You can look at the previous sale data. Demand is very high for Banksy. It's a market where there's very few works out there, and many have been destroyed. What's important to remember is when Banksy first started producing works, sort of early 2000s, these could be picked up for £50, £100, £25. These were sort of not investments as such, and now they're worth considerably more than that. I think Banksy's going nowhere, and that's the wonderful thing. Banksy's one of the most blue chip artists out there.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because of course, when you buy a Banksy print for £75 in a Bristol market store, you're not really thinking about investment, are you? It just it happens if you held on to it and sold it at the right time. Which, you know, will still be absolutely the right time. You know, that was a wonderful investment. But that's not really an investment. That's luck, isn't it? That's really good luck. And I think, you know, luck that's why you should walk into a gallery that sells primary works, you know, straight from artist studios, and that's quite often we see that with collectors. You know, their collection is half about emerging artists looking for the next big thing, finding something that resonates, and half is about, okay, I do actually need, you know, 5% of my art portfolio to be at least stuff that I know is going to hold its value, and that's where you can judge it as an asset. Now I have got 6 minutes left. We're going to stick investing in art. Oh, so many questions. But I really want to ask this last question because I think that it is a good one, and it's quite a personal one to each of you. And if I have time, I'll come back to the questions. If I could give you all a £50,000 art as an asset budget, as if it was 5 to 10% of your asset portfolio, and ask you how you'd spend it, where you'd spend it, and what your exit strategy would be, what would you choose? Simon, I'm going to come to you first.
I'm a terrible one for this because I would go all in on one artist and one artwork. I have always been obsessed by Vija Selmans, who does these incredible ocean dry points, and it looks so realistic. I would go all in on one of her works. I would get it from. It's a funny one, that, because you kind of look at it and sometimes you kind of think that the auction prices look more reasonable, but then also there is the less you're waiting for something to come up. Whereas if I go to a broker, let's say, I can have them look at the market to find the perfect piece that I want. So I'd probably go for the latter, given the fact that I'm going all in on one. And I would hold probably for kind of, well, I would basically look and wait for the periods that exhibitions in significant institutions of her works are coming up, and then take a view on whether to sell. I wouldn't necessarily put a specified time frame, but I'd say it would most likely be longer than 5 years.
Okay. And you'd hang it in your house and enjoy it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would be pride of place in the bathroom. So
Anna, what would you spend yours on?
Yeah, I feel I need to answer this question in two parts, because obviously working for Timeless, I would say invested across different artists and across different works by fractions. But yeah, I mean, listing now £50,000 worth of that is probably going to be too long. But I mean, personally, I think one piece that I actually bought recently, in which I still stand by 100%, is the work by David Hockney. I mean, we discussed actually in this call already right now the investment potential of his market. You know, he's still creating a lot of work. Now he has the exhibition at Louis Vuitton Foundation coming up. So there's so much happening in his market. It is such a constant demand supply sort of balance, which is really nice. And rather than maybe going for the big, you know, series that everyone knows right now, I think like the lesser known ones, potentially like the dogs, they're beautiful pieces, they're super intimate, they have a super strong collector base, so they, you know, they don't come to market often. And there was the portfolio sale, so the whole portfolio was sold back in 2023, I think, for like 6-figure number. So I think there is definitely investment potential for that one. I mean, if I could, I would also hang it in my apartment, probably not in the bathroom, because that's not going to be good for the value. But yeah, and hopefully I think auctions could be an interesting exit channel actually for that particular piece. Yeah.
Brilliant. Jasper?
Oh, everyone that knows me, I'm sort of a massive fan of Riley. I think the Banksy market is a really interesting space to be looking at for opportunity. We look at sort of probably trading sort of pre-COVID levels now. So I think from a sort of asset perspective, I'd be looking to get an unsigned Banksy. I would also get some sort of old school works by Riley. I think that's also a good market to be involved in. And then I'm running out of money. You know, I'd probably be looking to get a Warhol as well. These I'd make sure it's blue chip, make sure the quality's you know, the best quality they can be within reason. Obviously these are old works, but yeah, I would want to spread sort of risk across all different artist markets. Banksy sort of bubbling. I think that there could be something that's going to move in that market, which would be exciting to have a piece like that. And then yeah, it's all something I'd have in my house, so I'd have to like it as well. And I like all of the yeah, you know, an Elapse by Bridget Riley, maybe, you know, the old school black and white works by her as well. I really like the Fragment series. Yeah, and you know, an unsigned sort of Flying Copper or something like that by Banksy, I think would be it's just an iconic sort of punk rock Banksy piece.
I think as there is one more question. I know we're on the hour, but if you allow me, it's very important, this question for Simon. And then I just want to sum up something that I thought about all your answers. Do you think we're going to see stricter regulation around the concept of investing in art, considering recent lawsuits? Can you answer that in a 60-second window?
You already have it. In the art market is claimed by everyone to be this unregulated Wild West. It's not. You have things like the anti-money laundering regulations that apply. You have many Proceeds of Crime Act. There is a lot of legislation that actually regulates the art market with regards to investment. As Anna said in respect of Timeless, it is financially regulated, and that is the same thing when it comes in the UK to fractionalisation or art investment funds and those sorts of things.
And so the concept of guaranteed returns is already not acceptable.
Absolutely. It's not acceptable.
They're very, very, it's not acceptable. It's illegal. Okay. Guys, I think this has been so interesting. And what I love about your final answers on that budget I gave you is that sort of proves the point that I wanted to prove with this conversation, which is that it's none of us who work in the world of art as an asset see this industry as a financially motivated investment market, but rather it's about having that information. You know, you all talked about what you love, what you want to live with, what you look at, but then you also talked about those nuances of detail around value, around condition. Simon doesn't care so much because he's putting his painting in his bathroom, but I know he wouldn't actually do that. So I think that's exactly what, you know, we wanted to sort of reveal today, is that this is an asset worthy market. This is an investment space, but it's really so much to do with having that information and having as many data points and pieces of education at your fingertips as possible. Thank you all so much. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Charlotte.
Bye.